Well, this is Ed Stetzer Live. Welcome back to the program. This and every Saturday at this time, we have good, important conversations about the moment, the mission, our own personal spiritual lives, the cultural challenges, and more. My name's Ed Stetzer. I'm the dean at the Talbot School of Theology at Biola University out here in sunny Southern California. Though this week it has not been sunny, which is unusual for us because it never rains in Southern California, as the song says. But I'm broadcasting live from my studio here at Mariners Church, and we're going to be taking your calls around the country as well. We're on about 250 outlets, so folks will listen all around the country and call in as well. Of course, those of you listening on the app or podcast later can't call in when you're listening later, but if you're listening on the app, you can. Our number is 877-548-3675. But let me tell you our guest first and what our conversation will be about today. So our guest is a returning guest, actually, Tori Hope Peterson. She's an author, speaker, Bible teacher, and a lover of people. Since she came to faith, she shared her testimony and life as authentically as she can to help and offer hope to others. She's known for her fierce advocacy work for foster care, which is, by the way, I think where I first interacted with her, and we talked some about foster care. And if you follow her on social media, she's very much passionate about that topic, and I love that. Adoption and vulnerable children. Her latest book is Breaking the Patterns That Break You. Here at the Talbot School of Theology, we just received a grant from the Lilly Foundation talking about helping parents with children in difficult foster care situations in spiritual nurture and more. So I just, when we got that grant, I thought, I want to talk to Tori Hope Peterson, not related to that, but just because this has been a passion for her and her own story so interacts with this as well. And I've been blessed by it. Again, her current book, her latest book is Breaking the Patterns That Break You, Healing from the Pain of Your Past and Finding Real Hope That Lasts. And we're going to talk about that and take your calls. But before we even get there, first, Tori, thanks for coming on the program. And if you don't mind, by starting, would you just tell a little bit about your story?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Ed. It's so good to be back. I first went into the foster care system when I was 4 years old and then was reunited with my mom, went back into the system again when I was 12 years old and moved throughout 12 different homes, which really made me feel very unwanted, very unloved. And as I came into my adult years, those thought patterns really still plagued me. And I had to learn how to untangle and entangle those lies and replace them with truth.
Interesting. And again, that's a big part of your journey and your story. You do now, before you came on the air, you're married, you have children, you're at a different stage in life. You're not in foster care anymore. So why didn't you just, wake up one day and say, I'm not dealing with the problems of my past and I'm just going to not worry about it and move on? Why are there patterns that are still there?
Yeah, I think that really our patterns are kind of embedded in us, whether we notice them or not. And that's the thing, we usually don't notice them. Psychological research shows that when we grow up in dysfunction, we're 4 times more likely to enter into dysfunction, whether it's through work or through relationships. And the psychological research also shows that we don't notice it because it's what we've always been used to. It's what we've always known. And we do it because it's actually where our brains find comfort, even if we don't want to do it. And so I think that I was seeing these patterns within myself. I was seeing broken relationships. I was seeing continual feelings of despair. And I thought, this is not what the Lord has for me.
Love that. And I love that that's something you were willing to step into. And you share, a lot of that journey in the book, Breaking the Patterns That Break You. And I should say, too, to our callers, we're going to give away 5 copies of the book, not just to people who call and say, I want a copy of the book, but to people who have brilliant and insightful questions, as our callers here at Ed Stetzer Live always do. Our phone number, and again, maybe you want to weigh in and say, hey, help me to understand what are some of these patterns? How would I break them and more? Our number is 877-548-3675. So at what point did you begin to notice? Because again, you have this very, telling, challenging, traumatic would be an appropriate word to describe, foster child experience, a childhood experience. Then you go on and you become a believer. You go on to what I'm not sure what the right term is to describe pageants nowadays. What is the right term to describe pageants nowadays?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, I went
Okay.
on to do a pageant.
Okay. And you won a pageant. Like you won, like, what was the pageant you won? And you're like the queen of the whole world. What is that?
No, yes, I won the title of Mrs. Universe, not the queen of the whole world. A title.
So someone sees your life, here you are, you had a hard childhood, but now you're the queen of the whole world. That's what I'm gonna call you from now on. You're the queen of the whole world, and you're married, you have children, you have a successful ministry. When did you begin to see these patterns from your past were holding you back? When did that start to become obvious to you?
Yeah, I would say that there were signs from, when I was a teenager and a young adult, but I didn't necessarily see them or notice them. And then there was one Christmas, my husband and I, we were organizing presents, for family members and community members, people that we loved, organizing presents for Christmas, getting ready. And one of the nicest gifts in the whole, pile, everything that we were organizing was this leather bag. And I put it in this woman's pile, who I really wanted her to be my mother figure. I really wanted her to love me and accept me. And she went to our church, and it's one of their, I think, being a leader in ministry, she was also a leader in ministry. And I just wanted her validation and her approval. And so I put the bag in her pile. But we didn't have a very good relationship. I would actually say it reflected a lot of the relationship with my biological mom. And then my husband, he stopped me and he was like, why are you giving all of the nicest presents to her? Why don't you give some nice presents to your family? Like, you never give nice presents to your family. And I was adopted and taken into a family after I had aged out of foster care. So I was adopted as an adult. And I was so offended by what my husband said. I was like, what do you mean I don't give nice gifts to my family? But then when I looked, when it was all laid out in front of me, what I saw was that I did. I gave all the nicest gifts to the people in my life that I wanted validation from, that I wanted approval from, that I wanted to love me. And then I kind of rejected the people who loved me. And so what I saw was this pattern of loving the people who rejected me, rejecting the people who loved me, running towards the people who were running away from me. And what was happening was, because I was running towards the people who, really weren't giving me a second look, I didn't realize all the people who were running after me. And so I'm so thankful, for people who they don't, maybe people will say, oh, her husband called her out. But I want to say my husband called me up, right? He called me up out of this pattern so that I could have healthy relationships with those who loved me.
Fascinating, fascinating. I was yesterday. I'm the dean at the Talbot School at Biola University, and the president says to me, "I'm not the president. I got a boss of me," and the president says, "Hey, I got a group of these college students I meet with, and I want you to meet with them so they can ask you deep, probing, personal questions." And I'm like, "Oh, okay. Well, this is interesting." Well, it's kind of so we're having this conversation, and they were talking about, what are some things that from your past kind of impacted your present. And I went back to 10 years ago. I had this best boss I ever had. His name was Brad Wagoner at Lifeway. You've had some interaction with Lifeway, Tori. And he was my supervisor, and he sat me down. And, I always got generally good to great reviews, I guess. I mean, I'm a hard worker. And as he went through this, he said, well, then let's talk about some of these things. You keep seeming to, when you get frustrated, you tend to overreact, and you end up burning some bridges. And I've noticed it's a bit of a pattern. And I'm like, whoa, back this bus up. This is not a counseling session. But even my supervisor, and what a great supervisor to say when I was interacting with your work life, man, I'm not quite sure why you kind of, overreacted certain things and then burns bridges for you, but this is something you want to work on next year. And what a gift it was. I mean, I've never, first of all, when you work hard and, people are often just very affirming, but for someone to say, here's an area you'll be better. And that was a pattern. So when I look at your book again, and by the way, that pattern came from childhood experiences as well. So when I look at your book, Breaking the Patterns That Break You, Healing from the Pain of Your Past and Finding Real Hope That Lasts, I kind of thought to myself, that's kind of like I have patterns, still have patterns. I think I'm probably unaware of some of those patterns as well. I guess that's why they're called blind spots. You can't see them. So when you think about those things in your own life and journey, what for you was the turning point that you began to heal through some of those things? And I guess maybe, is it just one? In my case, I can't identify one. I can identify a few, but what about for you?
Yeah, so I love what you said. Like you had this person, this mentor, this person who had kind of went ahead of you and then called you up. And so I think that when we have people in our lives that we can go to and ask this question, what do you see in me that I don't see in myself? And not get defensive and accept what they're saying, receive what they're saying, and then still be loved by them, right? Like still be accepted by them. Like they see the thing in us that we don't see in ourselves that maybe is glaring, that's maybe even hurtful towards them or towards the people around us, and still be loved by them. I think that's really, really healing, to be in community and to persevere, right, through the hard parts of ourselves and through other people. I think that's what's been really, really healing to me, is that I have a strong community. I have people around me who have stuck with me. The statistics for youth aging out of foster care are really saddening, and I haven't always been easy to love, and I haven't always embraced those who have loved me well. And so I think just seeing them stick with me has been healing. And then I actually started therapy when I was 12 years old. A judge mandated it because he understood and knew the trauma that I'd experienced in my family of origin. And when I look back at that, I see that, I started to learn how to process what had happened to me at a very young age. And I think that has to do a lot, with my ability to do what I do now. I have to go in front of people, and I often have to talk about difficult topics. And so I'm really thankful that I started therapy at such a young age, and alongside having a strong church community and coming to the Lord and understanding my identity in Him. I think it's been really this mix of things. And when I was in this community and as I was processing these hard things, I had a minister, a church leader, who asked me to share my testimony for the first time when I was 17. And I know that there are some church leaders who would say, wow, that's kind of irresponsible. I wasn't saved for that long. But there's this story, it's like my favorite Bible story. It's in Mark 5, and Jesus heals a man, a demon-possessed man, in a cave, and it said that he had cuts all over his body, and he was like thrashing, and Jesus healed him. The people who witnessed the miracle, it says they run to the nearby towns, and they tell what Jesus did. And then the man who was healed, he runs to Jesus. Jesus is getting on the boat because people are like, well, this Jesus man is cray-cray, like, get out of here. And Jesus says, okay, peace out. He gets on the boat, and this man who he healed, he followed him and said, Jesus, can I come with you? And Jesus says, no, go and tell what I have done in your life. And that is what, this church minister, this leader, offered me to do, when I wasn't ready, when I wasn't healed at such a young age. And I think it's so incredible because we think the thing that would have been, the most life-changing for this man, right, is to go walk hand in hand with Jesus, to go follow him and go do ministry with him. But Jesus instead says, go and tell what I have done in your life. So there were other people who were going to tell it. Like there are other people already telling the miracle, already telling the story. And I think it points to, Jesus wants us to tell our story, I think for his glory, but I also think it's for our good. And so telling my story really has been something that has been so healing, and it's allowed me to see that the worst parts of life can be made good.
Yeah, so good, so good. And you tell more of that story and your own journey in Breaking the Patterns That Break You. Remember, we're taking your calls with Tori Hope Peterson, who, of course, is an author, but also the queen of the universe, at 877-548. If you just joined the program, you have to rewind and listen. 877-548-3675. Again, our phone number, 877-548-3675. We're going to give away copies of some books to some great callers with great questions or comments. 877-548-3675. Hey, we're back. Glad to see folks calling in. Looking forward to some good conversations in just moments away. We're going to get to your calls as well. Our guest is Tori Hope Peterson, author, speaker, Bible teacher. Her newest book is Breaking the Patterns That Break You, Healing from the Pain of Your Past and Finding Real Hope That Lasts. And forward by Bob Goff, good guy as well. And if you don't know her prior book is called Fostered, One Woman's Powerful Story of Finding Faith and Family Through Foster Care. And we actually we're using that in our some of the things we're doing at Talbot School of Theology now, related to foster care. And so we're excited about that as well. Our phone number for your calls is 877-548-3675. Again, that's 877-548-3675. Okay, so these self-destructive cycles, that seems to be a key recurring thing in your book. I mean, patterns are self-destructive cycles. The example I gave was my boss was a good enough boss to tell me you got a self-destructive cycle and really helped me to overcome it. You've talked about your own journey, self-destructive cycles, and there's levels of this. Like, right, in my case, it was a work thing that I needed to do better on at work, but there are some self-destructive cycles that can really be soul destroying and more. So let's talk to us a bit about it. What are some of the signs someone's caught in a self-destructive cycle?
Yeah, I think constant feelings of angst, anxiety, despair, depression, and then I think broken relationships or relationships that are maybe unstable, dependencies on people. I talk in the book, I talk a lot about codependency, and I would define that as an unhealthy dependence on people rather than a dependence on God. It's when we put people in the place of God, where we're looking to people to tell us who we should be, what we should do, to validate us, affirm us, right? And really, we should be looking to God to tell us who we are and what we should do to validate us and affirm us, because our identity is ultimately in Him. And so those dependencies on anything outside of God, whether that's drugs, alcohol, people, social media. I think those are some signs that are often function under the surface that are harder to see than we think.
Good. Okay, well let's go to some of our calls here. I think let's go to Tony in West Chicago, Illinois. Tony, you're live on the air. Go right ahead with your question or your comment. Merle, I need you to select Tony, please. There we go. Sorry about that, Tony. Go ahead and start again.
Okay. So I'm just listening as I'm identifying so closely with what your guest is sharing. I was adopted and grew up in a home where my dad was very distantly emotional, and I never heard him say that he loved me at any point. And so I responded in well, you can go two ways, it seems. You can either go into the depression way or you can go into the rebellion way. I went the rebellion way, and so my life was a mess until I came to Christ at the age of 26. Anyway, the main reason I wanted to call was that I suffered a tremendous wounding as a result of not having a father who really just encouraged me or related to me. And it's only very recently, in my 70s now, that I received, believe it or not, help through my wife, who had her own counseling business for 20 years. She grew to be an expert in eye movement desensitization, EMDR, which is a technique anybody doesn't know, that just basically helps your brain to stop focusing on covering up things and releases you to really begin to understand what the problems were. So as a result, my life has been really transformed. I'm thrilled about how God used that in my life. And I'm just now beginning to develop relationships with people on a different level, because I think that looking back, my rebellion took the form of thinking more highly of myself than I ought to think, and acting out of that.
Cool.
So,
well, Tony, let's get Tori Hope Peterson to weigh in a little bit on that. Now, again, I'm not a counselor. Tori Hope Peterson's not a counselor. So EMDR, I'm familiar with, but don't know all the details. But let's talk in general, Tori, about the place of counseling, the place of different kinds of therapy, and kind of walking through some of these patterns. Because I think some clearly are going to be things that you want to encourage somebody to engage a therapist or more. Some could be life patterns that you can change on your own. Where would you? Oh, let me also say, Tony, if you'll hold on the line, we're going to give you a copy of Breaking the Patterns That Break You as well. So after you hear Tori's answer, Tori Hope Peterson's answer, my producer will come on the line. But jump right in and tell us.
Yeah, Tony, thanks so much for sharing your story so vulnerably and so openly. The first thing that came to mind is that quote, like that old dogs can't learn new tricks. And I think it's so admirable at your age that you were like, I'm going to go to therapy. I think that, generationally, my mom, my biological mom, she didn't really receive the help that she needed because of the way that her generation thought about therapy was like, if you go to therapy, you're like mad, like you're insane. And so my mom really felt a lot of shame around therapy, and ultimately that's why she passed down patterns to me. And so good for you that you said, this is going to end with me. I think it's so admirable, and I think that therapy in my life has been very, very valuable as well. I also found a lot of relief from the EMDR, and that's typically the kind of therapy that I offer to trauma, or I suggest to trauma survivors. So thank you for bringing that up. So good to hear your story and have you on.
Fascinating. I didn't expect an EMDR conversation here. Again, familiar with it. We have, Rosemead School of Psychology at Biola and a marriage and family therapy program in our world. But again, I am not an expert on that, but I'm fascinated to hear both of you talk about that as well. All right, let's continue to go to the calls. Let's go to Rose down in Franklin, Tennessee, which is where all the people are moving to in America today. All my friends keep moving to Franklin, Rose, but you're live on the air with your question or comment. Go right ahead.
Yes, good morning. Just wondering, as a parent, how we can help a child begin to heal. He came into our family at 2, adopted from Guatemala, doing really well till he hit about 13, and then hormones kicked in and feelings of rejection and abandonment. Hasn't embraced his adoptive family as much as we would have hoped that he would, and just now starting some destructive behaviors. Again, doesn't know that he needs to heal.
Rose, that's so hard. So sorry. Praying with you as well. Thank you for the question. And again, hold on the line right afterwards. After you hear Tori Hope respond, we'll share a little more, and we'll give you a copy of "Breaking the Patterns That Break You." So I mean, Tori Hope, this is a pretty. I mean, there's a lot of stories of a lot of pain that you seem to. I mean, it's hard being a child anyway, but kind of navigating through maybe adoption or foster care or things of that sort. So what advice would you give to Rose?
Yeah, Rose, thanks so much for your question. Thank you for the love that you give kids and for getting on here, because there are a lot of parents who wouldn't be adoptive and foster parents who wouldn't be brave enough to even ask the question, and who it's painful to ask this question, right? Like, we want to shove it down and we want to avoid it. And so I just commend you for getting on here and being vulnerable and asking the question. I think we said some obvious answers, right? Like, so sorry to be repetitive, but I think when I was put in therapy at 12 years old, I was so annoyed by it. Like, I was like, I don't need therapy. Like, there's nothing wrong with me. And then when I was in therapy for years, I looked back at, 16, and I thought, wow, I really needed that. And so I think that there is a kind of leadership that we have to take as parents, even if our children do not want to do something or they do not see the good of it, that sometimes we do have to push them and force them into it because they might see it, down the road. We know what's good for them. And so I would encourage you to maybe try that. Another thing is just community, putting your kid around good people, and maybe even going to someone and asking someone without your youth knowing, hey, would you just be this person in my kid's life? Like, just kind of go out of your way when you're at church, go out of your way to just talk to them. And would you maybe try to grow into a mentorship role in their life? For me, I really needed more people than my foster and adoptive parents to attach to and to connect with. In my new book, I talk a lot about attachment styles, and discovering my own attachment style has been really, really helpful to me. So maybe just sitting down, if your child is open to it, and being like, hey, I'm learning about this attachment style for myself, kind of put it on you and be like, what do you think about this? What do you see in yourself when we talk about attachment styles? Starting with yourself, but then maybe pointing the question back to them. I think if we can begin to just open our kids' eyes to different forms of psychology, different forms of, what the Lord says about us, it can just begin to be really helpful. And they might not, I always say, they may not see it in the moment, But for me, oftentimes I didn't see it, but I looked back. And as I looked back, I saw what people were doing, and my eyes started to be opened as my brain started to mature. And I think that's the really hard part of all of this, is that sometimes it just takes time. And so I pray that God gives you peace in the waiting, and He gives you comfort in the waiting as your child's brain just matures.
But man, it is so hard, as you know, to get sometimes kids into counseling as well. So these journeys are all pretty complicated. Okay, we're going to continue our conversation with Tori Hope Peterson in just a moment. She's an author, speaker, Bible teacher. Her newest book is Breaking the Patterns That Break You. We're also taking your calls, 877-548-3675. Again, that's 877-548-3675. Maybe you have questions about, patterns you find in your own life and how to walk through those, or maybe it's your kids or more. Give us a call. Let's continue our conversation in just a moment. Okay, we are back at Stetzer Live. Tori Hope Peterson is our guest. Her book, Breaking the Patterns That Break You, Healing from the Pain of Your Past and Finding the Real Hope That Lasts. Also want to commend to you her earlier book, which is called Fostered, One Woman's Powerful Story of Finding Faith and Family Through Foster Care. And if you go to edstetzerlive.com, you can find, the show notes are there, and it'll link to her books and also to her prior show that we actually talked about her book, Fostered, as well. And again, we use it at the Talbot School of Theology as well. She tells her story being grown up in the foster care system, and kind of it's worth reading. Both these are worth reading. I think you'll find them helpful as well. We've given away a few copies of Breaking the Patterns That Break You, and I should be clear, we're giving them away to thoughtful callers with questions or comments, not just kind of a call-in show where you get a free copy of the book, though that would be awesome if we had millions of those. But anyway, our phone number, if you'd like to join us, is 877-548-3675. We're going to go to frequent caller Raj, and again, our number is 877-548-3675. Dr. Raj, you're live on the air with your question, your comment. Go right ahead.
Thank you. I was wondering how important self-awareness was for your successful, dealing with life, and what forms of therapy did you find the most helpful?
Now, Tori, I want to let you know, Raj is actually a physician, so these are not like casual questions. I expect you to answer brilliant, insightful questions to Dr. Raj. But go right ahead.
Yeah, I would say we brought it up earlier, but EMDR has probably been the most helpful. And in terms of self-awareness, that is such a good question. I do think that has been a really important role in who I am today. My self-awareness kind of started with a fear. I realized that the people, my abusers who hurt me, they weren't aware they hurt me. They weren't aware of their abuse. And that's true for a lot of abusers and a lot of hurt people who hurt people, right? And so I started to really get scared because I thought, what if I'm unaware of hurting people? What if I'm someone that hurts others? And so for a while, it was a tool, right? Like self-awareness is a tool, and it's obviously very useful. But I do think there have been times where it's been a bit almost like debilitating because I've been, like, there's this pressure, right, to be aware, because if I'm not aware, I'm going to do something wrong. And so I've tried to kind of hold my own self-awareness in one hand with also, an awareness of God in the other. When I look to Him, right, I have an awareness of His character and His goodness and His love, and I want to be more like that. And I feel like it kind of takes the pressure off of I need to be perfect to not hurt people. So it's kind of been a balance, but I do think that from a young age, I have been able, I haven't been perfect at it by any means. There have been times that criticism has plummeted me, but I have been, when someone has given me criticism or feedback, I have always taken it pretty seriously. My pastor's wife said a few weeks ago, she said something about Tori is that she will always consider what you have to say, and it's about herself. And that's true. Like something, if someone says something about me, I'll kind of always take it into prayer and say, Lord, is this true? And if it is, I will receive that, and I would say that I will work on it. And there, like I said, there are times where I've been defensive. There are times when I'm like, no, I'm not going to receive that when it has been very true. But I do think being able to receive criticism and feedback and not get defensive and hear people and talk through things has been a kind of superpower that has helped me be self-aware. But I have to hold in the other hand an awareness of God, or it becomes crippling.
Yeah, and one of the things you talk about in the book is Breaking the Patterns That Break You, is the idea, you kind of express it as inviting Jesus into your pain. So what does that look like as you kind of live that out? How does your relationship with the Lord help? Where's that fit into this journey? Because again, secular people who don't, or people of other religions, they walk through and got to deal with their pain as well. But you put a big emphasis on inviting Jesus into your pain. Unpack that for us.
Yeah, there's a large part of me that doesn't want to go back to the past. Often, I live in the same town that I was saved in, that I grew up in, that I went to church in as a kid. I go to the church that I went to as a kid, and so there are sometimes I just don't want to go back. I don't want to go back there. I just want to live in the Tori that I am now. But there have been moments in my life. So I lived in a trailer park when I was a kid. And in that trailer park, that is where a lot of the abuse happened. That's where I lived before I went into the foster care system for the second time. That's where a lot of the trauma was born in my life. And it was probably about 2 years ago now. I was in a prayer meeting at my church, and my pastor started to pray for the trailer park. And he just said, he was like, Lord, just be with them, help them get through this. And I just stopped, and I was like, wait, what's going on? And he said that the water had been shut down in the trailer park. And I was very startled by that. I was like, okay, so what happens in developing countries is happening like in our town, like right across town.
Wow.
And so I got a hold of the trailer park manager, and I was asking her what we could do to help. And she kind of just wanted to get off the phone with me. She did not want to talk to me. I think she thought I was like another city official kind of coming and telling her to fix things. And I was like, no, I want to help. And she pretty much just wanted to hang the phone. And then I stopped and I told her, I was like, hey, I grew up in that trailer park, and I know how hard it is. And there's just a part of me that I don't always want to bring that up. I don't want to bring the past up. But when I brought it up, I could just feel her wall crumble down, and she had tears in her eyes, and she said, actually, we need bottled water. We need clean water. Can you please bring us some? And I realized it was when I connected my past to her present, when I connected my past brokenness to her current brokenness, that is when she opened up. And I think that's what we have to do. We have to let Jesus into our brokenness, and we have to let him use it for his good and his glory.
That's not always so easy. And I do love how you tie into defiance. I think when we were off the air, I think in my brain, I was thinking that was in northeast Ohio. It's northwest Ohio. So for Toledo. So you might have actually people listening on WPOS FM 102.3 FM, which is out of Toledo, and our Moody partner there. And so maybe some folks will call or maybe know some of that story. Again, our phone number to call here at Ancestral Live Talk to Tori is 877-548-3675. Raj, hold on the line. We're going to give you a copy of Breaking the Patterns That Break You. Let's go to Joe in Naperville, Illinois. You're live on the air, Joe.
Hi, Ed. How you doing? Hey,
good. Go right ahead.
Great. Hey, you came to Compass Church. I go to Compass Church, and you shared about having gospel lenses, and I really took heart to that message. So thank you very much.
Oh, cool.
And
thank you, brother.
Yeah. So Tori, hey, thanks for showing up here and sharing your book and your story. I'm just calling, just to kind of maybe piggyback on what you just shared about, how you don't like to go to your past and honestly, I don't really either. Like, I like having a gospel lens on my life. I am sincerely really trying to just to reach. Just to go for God's plan in my life, and really just go for what God has. However, with what you just shared, really kind of answered the question why I was calling. You're just finding that balance of how like to keep my focus on looking unto Jesus. From Hebrews 12:2, we were just at this camp, the winter camp at the there at the at the Lake Geneva Youth Camp, and it was great. God was touching our youth, but He was touching my life too, and I was just kind of reflecting on my past, my future, and where I'm at with the Lord now. But and so, anyways, I guess my question or my concern is, like, how do you find that, like that tender balance of, keeping your eyes on Jesus in daily life and yet being sincere about where your issues are as far as your hurts in your past. And I mean, I like to keep my focus on what God has me currently in the present. So, like, how do I be more, I guess, more sincerely open about our hurts and past? Maybe if you need me some encouragement with that, that would be great, Tori.
Well, good. Let me just say we're gonna, Tori, hold on just one second, because we're gonna give Joe a copy of the book. Again, the book is Breaking the Patterns That Break You. And if you'll hold on just a second, we're gonna let Tori Hope Peterson weigh in on that question. And the question basically of what's on the outside, what's on the inside. How do we deal with our own issues? How do we also deal with the issues that may be related to trauma that we experience? Again, our phone number to call in, 877-548-3675. We've got one more segment with Tori Hope Peterson, 877-548-3675. Okay, we're back. Ed Stetzer Live. Tori Hope Peterson's our guest, having a fascinating conversation. Her book is Breaking the Patterns That Break You. So just before the break, we heard from Joe in Naperville. Hey, Joe, thanks for your call. Did super job sharing some of the question in and around there. So talk to us a little about that, Tori Hope Peterson. Like, how do we, sometimes we're struggle. We got sin in our lives. Sometimes it's trauma we're trying to wrestle through. How do you factor all that together? I know it's a big question.
Yes, it is a big question. So when I was in my 11th foster home, I had foster parents who, they proclaimed the name of Jesus, and they took me to church. And I started to have a lot of questions. I just started to become more aware at 17 of, I'd heard about God before, but I think I just kind of like a light bulb went off, and I started to actually ask questions and become more curious. And my heart was kind of drawn towards this Jesus guy who was loving and who cared about the outsider. I always felt like an outsider being in foster care. And my heart started to be drawn towards him, but behind closed doors, they abused their kids. And so what I started to understand who God was is that he, God, religion, Christianity is the mask that people put on to make themselves look good. And then I went to my 12th foster home, and I had a foster mom who, she proclaimed the name of Jesus. She took me to church regularly, and she loved me, and she was very sacrificial, and she loved children, and she just was who she said she was. And it was in her home. I gave my life to the Lord, and I am so grateful for that juxtapose that God gave me, because what I realized is that there's two ways that we can proclaim the name of Jesus, and one hurts people and draws people away from him, and one brings healing to people and brings people, closer to him. And so I think, integrity, living our lives, our Christian lives, our Christian walks and our faith with integrity is crucial. Important. I think integrity has to be at the forefront of our minds and of our hearts.
Yeah. And I think, Joe, part of Joe's concern is if I'm understanding it correctly, is that, there's our own sin and struggle, and we don't want to just put our struggles on external things. And so how do we how do we maybe recognize something when it's a struggle from the past or a sin that's in our lives, or are those things just so woven we just walk through all those together? What do you think?
Yeah, I think that we can notice them if we're asking the right questions. I think we just kind of have to pause and take inventory and ask ourselves good questions. Are there things from my past that are affecting my present? And maybe that's something that we can ask people who've known us for a long time, who have, like that question that I said at the beginning of the segment, go to somebody you love and say, what do you see in me that I don't see in myself? And because oftentimes I think that our sin is just woven into our life, and it can go so unnoticed. I think just like I can tell, from your question, you're not wanting to walk in sin. You want to walk integrity. You want to walk your life reflecting the Lord. And that's so genuine. And so I think if you can just go to someone, have a mentor, someone who's kind of went ahead of you, and ask them those good questions, I think it could be a good help.
Yeah, no, so good, so good. Okay, let's we'll try to get in a couple more calls. We have just a few minutes left in the program, so I want to encourage our callers to kind of jump right to the point at hand. And I'm going to go to Martha in Chicago. Martha, you're live on the air. Go ahead with your question or your comment.
Thank you. Good discussion. I really appreciate it. I like how you try to identify the things, the impulses, the blow-ups and all that stuff, but how do you get to those root causes that cause them, maybe so many years in behind that, the root cause? I don't know how to get there. And you raised another interesting thing about prayer. How can I pray better to get there?
Yeah. Yeah, good. Good. Two questions there, I think. So let's go. I'll get you hold on the line. Remember, we're going to give you a copy of Breaking the Patterns That Break You after the answer. So one is, how do you get to some of those root causes? And that question. And then how do you pray through those things? So you address both of those in your book, Breaking the Patterns That Break You. So let's talk about those.
Yeah, I think, we talked about embracing our brokenness, embracing our pain. And I think when we're getting to the root cause, oftentimes we have to do that. We have to ask ourselves, where is this pain coming from? We have to reflect on the ways that we've been hurt, maybe the ways that we've hurt others. We have to reflect on our past. I think that, this is something that's really good to do in therapy. It's something that's really helpful to do in journaling. And I mentioned storytelling at the beginning of the episode because I think that it's really through storytelling, journaling, telling, I get to tell my story on this radio, but you can tell your story to a friend. You can tell your story to a small group. You can tell your story to anyone. And I think the more that we do that with people who are willing to listen, it helps us begin to process the things that have happened to us in those root causes. And I think, how do we pray through those? I think prayer is, I don't think enough believers say it, but for me, prayer is challenging. So I just want you to know that I'm there with you. In my healing journey, I like to say that I haven't arrived. I'm with you and still healing and walking through healing and working through it. And so one of the things that I find very challenging is prayer. And I think that's because I'm often uncomfortable to sit, in the stillness and wait for those answers from. And so when I think about prayer and what I need to do to begin to see those root causes and begin to see those things that I struggle to see, I often have to wait on the Lord to answer. I have to go to Scripture and I have to be patient because, God is not a quick fix. He's not a Band-Aid. And sometimes that's how I've tried to use him. And so I think just waiting on him.
Yeah, which is not always so easy, but even in the waiting, it's a tough opportunity to grow as well. We're going to go to Becky in Indianapolis. Becky, you're live on the air. Go right ahead.
Thank you so much for taking my call. I just happened to tune in on my drive back. I have trouble relating due to things of my past, and I so want to help out the kids in the foster system, and I try to help out with Hands of Hope, which is an organization in our area. And I just feel like what I do is inadequate, that I don't bring the right spirit to it because I can't seem to let go of things that have happened. And I want to be a better vessel for God, and I'm not quite sure how to get there. It's been a long journey, and I'm not there yet. And I just would like a little advice how to get there maybe quicker so I can
So let me see if I understand. Let me see if I understand your question, Becky, just to make sure. So you're talking about your own struggles you've walked through and now wanting to help people who might be in the foster care system and not sure how to do that. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, more like a wounded healer. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And I think that's a super question, Becky. And I don't have any more books to give away, but I would, if I had another book, I'd give you a copy of Breaking the Patterns That Break You. But thank you for your call. So, I mean, Tori, where do we need to be to help others? Because I think, Becky, the wounded healer is a real thing. I'm thankful for people who lead with a limp, for example. But at the same time, maybe that's not always healthy. How do you think through that?
Oh, Becky, I love that you answered this question. Asked this question. I have really big opinions about this. Actually, first, I've been told since I started in ministry, I've been in ministry for 12 years, and I've usually always been the youngest in the room, and I've usually been one of the most unhealed in the room. And I have been told for years that you're just not healed enough, you're just not ready. And I talked about the story in Mark 5. I won't go through it, the whole thing again, but, Jesus didn't tell the man that he healed to go and get ready. He told him to go and tell his story. He told him to go and fulfill his purpose. And so when you are going and when you are serving and when you are loving, you are going and fulfilling the purpose that God has on your life. And the second thing that I'll say is oftentimes we want to look at other people like maybe you're looking to me or you're looking to someone else who's found healing and you're like, oh, I really wish that I was there. And I just want to emphasize, do not compare yourself to someone else's journey. Compare yourself to Becky 5 years ago. Compare yourself to Becky 10 years ago, because I think if you do that, you will have grace and mercy for yourself, and you will see that you have come much farther than you think. And the last thing I'll say, I really believe, so I have served children and youth who grew up like me for years. And one of the things that I feel like they've given me, it's like a window into their lives, right? And what a window does is you get to look into someone else's life, but it's also a reflection. They've given me a reflection and it looks a lot like me. And being able to serve them has actually shown me some of the patterns that I've had in my own life. It's shown me some of the ways that I was difficult and hurtful to those around me because they have been difficult and hurtful to me. And it's actually brought me more awareness of myself and brought me more healing. And so stay the course, stay where you are, continue to love and serve. And thank you so much for what you're doing.
What a super answer. What a super guest you've been, Tori Hope Peterson. We're thankful for you. Thank you for coming back on. Her book is Breaking the Patterns That Break You. I want to encourage you to get a copy of it. Again, she's a gifted writer among many other skills and talents, in addition to being the queen of the universe, as I said. Breaking the Patterns That Break You, healing from the pain of your past and finding real hope that lasts. Thank you for listening to Ed Stetzer Live. As always, you can hear this program again on the app or at edstetzerlive.com. Ed Stetzer Live is a production of Moody Radio, a ministry of Moody Bible Institute. Thanks to our team, Karen, Merle, James, and Titus, all working together to make this happen. Thanks for listening to Ed Stetzer Live.